she said she was running across a frozen field one time, and her mother was had a hold of her hand, and she kept falling down, and then she realized she was falling over frozen bodies under the snow. They looked back, and then after the engine blew up, the whole train blew up. As far as they know, they were the only 5 survivors on that whole women and children train.
Welcome out to God and Country. This is episode 9. We have a great guest with us here named Gary Dixon. His wife was Irmgard Dixon that he met in Germany. So in today's discussion, we're going to be discussing how Irmgard escaped Germany during the fall of Germany, right at the tail end of World War II. Russia was coming in from one side, as you can see from this map. Russia was coming in from the east. The United States was coming in from the west. And those who were on the east side of Germany were trying to get out as quickly as possible because the United States was being cordial and helping and not necessarily shooting or raping or pillaging every German they found, whereas Russia was raping women, killing children, and just being brutal because they were angry, they're revengeful, and they were persecuting as many Germans as they could essentially find. So not a pleasant story, but we're going to get into how Gary met Irmgard and then get into a lot of detail of how Irmgard got out of Germany. So let's start there. You grew up in Idaho?
Yes, I was raised on a farm in Pingree, Idaho, just west of Blackfoot.
I've been up to Blackfoot, Indian country, the casinos up there and everything.
Yes, and in fact, my wife thought she'd come to the end of the world out there when it was sagebrush and.
There's not much up there.
No,
there's not much up there.
At that time, there were about 300 people in the city of Pingree, and didn't even have a post office box. It was just Pingree, Idaho was my address.
So what were the dates of this? When did you go up
Well, I
there?
graduated in 1955 out of high school, so I'm pretty obsolete.
What high school was that?
Snake River High School.
Snake River High School.
Yes.
Was that out of Blackfoot or?
No, that was separate.
In Pingree.
Yeah, that was separate. Blackfoot was our rival country, you know, and so we were always competing against Blackfoot for something, and so Snake River was the whole combined area for Thomas, Riverside, Pingree, and all those areas out there, all the farming districts. So,
Gotcha. So kind of tell us a little bit how you grew up, what it was like in the 50s in Idaho.
Well, as a little child, my father was a construction man, so I traveled around in a trailer house while he was building roads all over Idaho. And then he moved into Pocatello, and he was a little bit of a renegade and a black sheep in his own family, and he decided to make some changes, and he thought he had to break his camaraderie with his comrades there, and so he moved out to Thomas, and we rented a 5 acres in Moreland and Thomas area, and that's kind of how we got started. And then Dad bought a farm in Pingree, and we all moved out to Pingree and decided to become farmers, and so few potatoes and spuds, we always called them, and grain, and
well, that's what Idaho is known
everything.
for is the Idaho potato.
Yes, and so we grew up on that, and my brother, 2 years younger than I, were actually, the last few years of high school, we ran the farm. My father had another job of land leveling and irrigation before sprinklers came in, and so my brother and I did the plowing and the harrowing, planting and harvesting, and Dad just did a share crop with us. We thought we was great. We were rich people when we sold all the spuds, and we got a big clump sum of money, so it was...
Not realizing that has to last the whole year, right?
Yeah, that's right. And and that was kind of interesting because they gave me a lump sum, and I thought it'd be a good idea for me to just buy an airplane. My dad would have been a pilot with a CPA. He said, I'll build you an airport on the bottom 40 if you want to do that. So I went looking for airplanes, and then I thought, you really can't date in an airplane, so I talked myself out of it.
That would still be a pretty impressive date. You want to go flying with me? I don't know very many people would say no to that.
No, probably. So anyway, as I got old enough, all at once when I turned 18, it seemed like kind of a switch turned and said, it's time for you to get on your own and do something else. And so I joined the Marine Corps and rode off into the sunset. And on the way down to the Marine Corps, I thought, I'm going to wake up someday and this nightmare is going to be gone, but it wasn't. And so I wound up in the Marine Corps and about 3 years in the Marine Corps, and that was
Where were you stationed in?
well, I started out in San Diego was my boot camp, and went to Pendleton for the secondary, and then wound up in 29 Palms, California, out in the desert. And
That must have been hot.
it was sometimes 118 degrees, and on an armored vehicle, you could fry an egg on the top of it. It was so hot. It was really bad. And but I guess I was 10 feet tall and bulletproof and didn't know that. So we just did what we had to do.
So were you 18 when you went in, or 19?
Yes, 18. Yeah,
18 when you
about
went
18.
in? And so only stationed in California then?
That's, yeah. We, when Lebanon came down, they sent Marines into Lebanon, and they put us on high alert. We loaded our gear and was all ready to ship it to the beach and to the ships and get on board. And then the political scenario changed, and they stopped, and we just went back home. So I spent most of my Marine Corps time in 29 Palms, California. So.
Frying out there like an egg.
Yeah, that's right. And then the Marine Corps has a feeling that everybody's an infantryman. So it doesn't matter what your MOS is, you're an infantryman. So we had to do that every once in a while. So they'd take us out to sea and bring us back and hit the beach and have you dig a foxhole or take a 50-mile hike through the sand and carrying all the stuff on your back and
full rucksack and everything.
Yeah,
in 120 degree
ammunition can in each hand, and you felt like you were going to die before you took the next step. But it was all good experience, and it found out the old mind can make the body do more than you think it can. So it was a good experience.
A lot of military people figure that out. I got 4 boys in the military. My oldest served in Army, served in Korea. My second son is Air Force, been serving 7 years, and he gets out here in a couple of days. And I have a son and an adopted son are just finishing up boot camp in about a month. And they're stationed in Missouri right now, going to be Black Hawk helicopter mechanics. So,
yeah.
So
Good.
yeah, we know we have the military experience. My grandpa served in the Korean War. My grandpa on the other side served in World War II on a battleship.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of military out there. So I don't envy you for having to serve in the Palms.
No, that was not the best, but it was something you just accepted. And the Marine Corps remind you that we didn't invite, you volunteered for this, fella. So they'd remind us of that all the time.
I hope they gave you a lot of water at least.
Well, that they did, and salt tablets. I don't know, that day and age, you're supposed to take a bunch of salt tablets while you're at it. So,
yeah, the electrolytes in the salt, I guess.
Yeah.
So from military, then where'd you go?
Well, I volunteered for everything in the Marine Corps, and they just didn't give me anything. I found out later my commander was trying to keep the people he thought would help him, and the kind that he didn't want, well, he'd ship them off to the schools, and so they'd say, I want to have a school for, and I'd raise my hand before I even knew what the school was. I even volunteered for guard duty in Alaska, but I didn't get anything, and so I said, well, if you're not going to give me anything, well, I'm out of here. They did give me an opportunity to become a Marine pilot, but they wanted me to sign up for 6 more years, and when I was 18, 6 years sounded like 600 years, and so that was not for me, and I wondered where I'd be if I'd stayed, because I'd probably stayed in the Marine Corps then. But then I went out, and I had a Marine buddy that went ahead of me into Illinois, and then one that got out with me, and the Marine buddy in Illinois said, come on over there and work. And so there's lots of work here, so we did, that both of us did, and we found out we could homestead some land in Alaska. So our goal was, me and the other Marine, to work all winter and then hit the beach and go up to Alaska and homestead the ground, and found if you made a $400 improvement for 5 years, the land was yours. So that's where our goal was. But the Marine in Illinois, where we went, had a sister, and I started dating her and spent all my money, so I couldn't go to Alaska. So I wound up going home.
The fateful flaw.
Yeah, she was a nice lady, and I think we'd had a good time, but there was quite a bit of difference in terms of philosophy and religious things, and so I said, well, I think I better go home. So I did, and then my bishop asked me to go to Germany, and that's where, on a mission, and that's where I went. It was a 2.5-year mission then, and
how old were you when you left?
I was 22 before I went on my mission, and so.
What year was that you left?
59.
59.
Yeah, and so. Then I got into Germany, and they just transferred me all over the place, and that's.
So, 59. We're talking 14 years almost after World War II.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, and but I had the privilege after my mission of going into the East Zone, and the difference between Germany in the East Zone and Germany in the West Zone were huge. They still had bombed out buildings all over East Germany. I went through Checkpoint Charlie and went over there and wandered around. They had all kinds of signs, and people weren't even laughing or playing. You see teenagers out in Germany playing, riding bicycles, and having fun and laughing and joking, and that wasn't the case in the East Zone. In fact, they wanted to know exactly what you had when you went across there, and I went over and talked to some German. East German guard over there, and says, "What do you think of the free world on the other side?" And he says, "I've only been here a little while. Shut up and get out of here." And
yeah, dangerous.
Yeah, and he was probably afraid to talk to me, and so there was a big difference between the two Germanys. And
well, kind of describe that a little bit, because there very, very few people are alive that were in World War II, even fewer that had those experiences of being in Germany pretty close to the end of the war. So give us a lay of the land. What did the landscape look like? What did the buildings look like? What was it like talking to the people? And because a lot of them were still had a lot of bad memories of World War II. So what was that like?
Well, I was amazed, I guess, when I met the German people, because I could not picture them as my enemy. They were just open-armed and very good, most of them. I met a few. I met one man that only had one arm, and he'd been in a prison camp in the war, and he was really bitter. And he said, if I had two arms, I'd throw you down the stairs. And he was not a happy camper. But for the most part, the West Germans were very, very open and very friendly and nice to talk to. But they did have everything. They grew from a destroyed country to a very modern country, and their attitude was go do things, make it happen, and they did. The East Zone, now when the wall came down, there was a little contention between the East and the West, because the East Zone had been influenced by communism, and the government had given them everything, and they come over into the West Zone, and the Germans expected them to go to work and work hard and do things. And they weren't measuring up to the German way, to the West German side of the house, and so
they had no work ethic at the time.
Yeah, it was a big difference, and so there were some hard feelings about that, and they didn't have much respect for the East Germans to start with.
But you were there when the wall was up, so
yes.
What was that like, being around that wall and because you went back and forth over the wall, right?
Yeah, well, not until after my mission. And then I got a Eurail pass and went all over the country. And
you never made it to the east side during your mission then?
No, that there wasn't a mission on the east side for us anyway. After my mission, I bought this Eurail pass, and you could get on any train, any bus, anywhere, and get off when you wanted to and get back on the next one. So we went all over the place from Italy and Spain and Holland and Poland, and then we decided to go into the East Zone, and that was the only place that I I was a little concerned because I got on the train and we had to go through the East Zone to get to West Berlin, and that was our goal. And here, as the train went across, here were machine gun nests along the side, and they were pointing at the train.
What year was that you went over?
That was 61.
Yeah, 61. So it was long before Reagan.
Yeah, and so and the guy that come through and checked your passport really made you feel uncomfortable because he was there and he'd look at your passport and there were 3 guys behind him with machine guns, submachine guns standing there, and he'd look at your passport and look at you and look at the passport and look at you. American, huh? You know, and it made you a little uneasy. You thought, oh, maybe you just extract me off the train and I'll disappear. But we went across and then we're going into West Germany, and it was good we spoke the language because if the sign was there, we never saw it. And the train pulled in, and we thought we should be in, this is a big city, and we should be pretty close to West Berlin. We rolled down the window and asked some lady standing on the platform. She says, "You're in West Berlin. The next stop's East Berlin. You better get off that train." So we jumped off a moving train, and then we went around West Berlin and decided to go through Checkpoint Charlie into East Berlin, and that was a real eye-opener to see the difference in the work ethic and in the political philosophy of the 2 countries, and that, of course, was before the wall came down, and so that was my experience with them. But Germans were good people, especially out in the country.
What was it like going through Checkpoint Charlie? I mean, how severe was that?
There was a big, a wall for the west side, and then there was a kind of a space in between, and you march over to the east side, and then they'd ask you for how much money you had, and just about everything. I thought they were going to extract my photograph or my camera and everything, but they didn't. So.
Was there very many people going back and forth, or were you guys pretty on your own?
We were pretty much on our own. There were quite a few people that were going back and forth, but I have no idea what their business was or who they were or anything like that. And we just wandered around and looked for.
What did the city look like at that time? Was it still pretty destroyed, or were there any type of rebuilding going on?
The East Zone had a lot of bunkers built up, and there was still a lot of rubble still laying in the city, and they had political signs all over the buildings, plastered everywhere, and then there were guards all over right around the wall to keep people in, and so on the west side, though, West Berlin was totally built up. They'd taken all their beat up buildings and made new ones, and it
looked pretty nice in it.
Yeah, it was a whole different.
How did it look during your mission? I mean, was there still a lot of rubble and reconstruction?
Everything pretty much was modernized after that. At my point on the mission, except for there were still those concrete bunkers that they couldn't tear down or didn't want to. I don't know which.
So pretty much all the rubble and the signs of war had been gone, or was there still signs of war when you were there?
Not on the west side. No, there wasn't any signs until after my mission and after my marriage. I wanted to go where my wife had been, as near as she could remember, and so we made a trip back down memory lane, I guess, where she went from her home down to where she arrived as a refugee, and there was a big difference there. But the people were really good, even in Poland. We got by really good with English or German anywhere except Poland. And Poland was influenced by Russia, and they were taught Russian, and so nobody spoke any English. And if they could speak German, I guess they wouldn't. Anyway, we had a tough time trying to communicate in Poland, which her hometown was Freistadt, Germany, and it was given to the Polish people afterwards. So now it's Kizilice, Poland. So I married a German and wound up with a Polak.
And there you go, down to the Polak. So, kind of during your mission, you were obviously proselyting, talking to a lot of people. I imagine you heard a lot of war stories.
We did.
Or war experiences. What were some of those like?
Well, my last city was city of Hereford, and it was occupied by the British. when I was there, still occupied by the British. But that branch had survived the storm, I guess, through the whole thing. But they had a colonel. He was a full colonel in the German army, but he was in the supply system. And he was a member of the church, and at his own risk, he siphoned off stuff to take care of people, not just the church, but everybody, and that he could. And he could have gotten himself in a lot of trouble, and I don't. Maybe he did, but there are stories of what he did and what they had to go through as a branch. They said they had a cake plan where everybody would bring a spoonful of flour and put it in a pot, and somebody had a special occasion like a marriage or some special occasion, they would bake the cake from a spoonful of flour from everybody to make it go. And people,
that flour was that scarce, huh?
Yeah, it really was. And that was, in fact, my wife's Irmgard's time she said her worst time was really at the end of the war. The starvation and nothing to eat was really hard, and it was tough while they were traveling. But she said the Red Cross was there, and they had little bits and pieces here and there. There was one occasion where she said she was really hungry, and her mother said, "Well, I have a carrot you can have now, but or you can have it for breakfast in the morning." And so she identified very strongly with people who didn't have anything to eat. And even here in America, when she was quite a fan of helping with the school lunches for kids that didn't have any and things like that, because she was very sensitive to somebody who went hungry, because she said she was hungry all the time, and especially at the end of the war, because the system had broken down and there was no shipping here and there, and it was food was a big deal. And then too, one of the kind of a comical thing, I guess, the Germans, the Americans came to the Germans and said, "What do you need for food?" And they said, "What do you need most?" "We need corn." Well, the word in German for corn is corn, you know. They said, so they got corn, but the German word is grain, you know, and what they said was they needed grain, but they said corn, and so they got corn, and Germans don't eat corn. So they wound up trying to do cornbread, corn everything, and she said, "We didn't like corn, but when you're hungry, you eat what you got."
Eat what you got.
Yeah.
So did you hear any people just telling you stories of experiences that they specifically had going through the war, of bombing runs or actually being in the military? Or because a lot of it was forced service.
Yes, it was.
Being in the German army.
Well, I got a lot of it from my father-in-law. He lived the last 6.5 years with us, and he was on the Russian front. And so I got quite a bit.
So he was in the army on the Russian front.
Yeah, he was fighting against the Russians. And
so did he tell you a lot of stories about that then?
Not a lot of stories. He didn't speak an awful lot about it, but I got bits and pieces of it from over the 6.5 years he lived with us. And he was really rough for them on the Russian front. And he kept sending letters back to his wife and Irmgard that things were going rough for him. They'd be prepared to get out. But the political scenario was that you weren't allowed really to run before you had to. And so when it did happen, the Russians started breaking through. They just had to run. And they probably were people that had some of the first 72-hour kits, because her mom had 2 bags sitting there right there. And when the Russians went through, a doctor come through and says, "The Russians are breaking through, go." And they ran. But her father was on the Russian front, and I know I was in an armored unit in the military, and I took him with me while I was in university and in a National Guard, and we had our tanks out in the desert, and I took him with me to move some tanks from one position to the next, and I was just a young lieutenant then, but I took him with me. And he walked around the tanks, and I guess he wasn't very impressed with our M48 tank, because he said the Russians will get you. And my sergeant heard him saying that, but he didn't understand it, but he understood the rah. So he decided my father-in-law didn't think much of our tanks. But he talked about going into Russia the first winter, that they didn't understand the winter, and the winter caught them.
No, was this Stalingrad? Because that was the worst winter the Russians, the Germans had.
It was terrible winter, and he said they moved a whole battalion of tanks in one night and just parked them, and the tanks froze to the ground, and they had to blow them all in place. They couldn't get them up. They had all their tracks frozen to the ground, and the next morning, and so they learned they had to move them every couple hours to survive them, and so, and then he was quite a guy. I don't know why he wasn't shot, because he was a very outspoken guy about what was right and what was wrong. And I don't know if you've ever seen Hogan's Heroes movie. Well, Colonel Klink was always threatening Sergeant Schultz with going to the Russian front if he didn't do what he was supposed to. Well, that was really true. My father-in-law was in Germany and come home. He was only was home four times from 1939 till 1947. He was in the Russian prison camp for 2 years, and he was only home four times in that long period of time. But he did, when he came home once, his last time, he was wounded a little bit, and then he got into some confrontation with some Nazi, probably a Gestapo guy or something, but immediately thereafter he was transferred to the Russian front. And that was really true. That was a true part, that if you spouted off, they were short on people, or they'd probably just shot him, but they sent him to the Russian front. And so he spent quite a bit of time there. And after the war, his commander happened to come and meet with Irmgard and her mother and told him what a great man he was, because when they were retreating in the zone, as they moved back, well, there were people out there wounded and moaning and groaning and asking for help, and in the middle of the night and freezing, and Gustav was my father-in-law, and Gustav volunteered to go with another tank and go back into at night, go back into this no man's zone and pick up a bunch of soldiers. And he did it more than once. He went twice back through there, throwing people on the tank and getting them back out. And his commander happened to tell Irmgard about that's the only way they knew what he'd really done.
It's probably why he was blessed enough to be able to find the family after all those years and be reunited and get to spend his final years with his daughter. That just warms my heart.
Yeah, I know. When they started splitting up, his commander broke them up into twos and said, "There's the Americans, there's the Brits, get to them." And he went and he got captured by the Americans, but the scenario was, if you fought against the Russians, you got turned back to the Russians. And so he was turned over to the Russians, and they, instead of just disarming him and sending him home like we did, they put him in a prison camp. So he was in a prison camp for 2 years, and he didn't know if his family had survived, or he just knew they left. And he didn't know where they went or in which direction.
Did he say how that prison camp was, if they were depriving them of food or anything?
He didn't say an awful lot about that, but he did say his brother was as an officer in the intelligence, and he was tortured something fierce. And he only lived a couple of months after he was released. He'd been beat up so badly. And I don't know, my father-in-law didn't talk an awful lot about it. I know that he was pretty bitter about God and country. He felt like if there was a God, he wouldn't let this kind of stuff happen. But with the atrocities and things that were going on, I don't know why he wasn't just shot, because I'm sure he had to do things he didn't want to do and was objecting to. But
I know that most Germans were kind of forced into service, and they weren't really
and
wanted to be part of the party.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between the Wehrmacht and the Nazi Party, and most people don't understand that. But there were a lot of people that were Nazis, and they were the elite portion of, and part of the just the political party at the time. And my father-in-law joined the Nazi Party first. He said Hitler was a good man to start with. He said he got us out of depression. He gave us work, and he gave us things to do, and the country was going well. And then he just got greedy about getting more land and payback for the First World War, and he said he went bad. But he said he said we didn't have any criminals, and we just, it was really good in him to start with. So he was quite impressed with it. But then, as it went on, he got out of the Nazi Party, and I don't know how that went or how he even got. He didn't say anything much about that. But I know Anna, his wife, never did join the party, and that made a huge difference, especially as it got toward the end of the war when items were scarce, because they were giving them out to the Nazi Party people first, and so medical attention and supplies and things like that were limited to those who weren't members of the Nazi Party, and Anna just never did, but she recognized that she was just had to go along with what it was. She said she witnessed several times when they tried to kill Hitler, and there was a lot of attempts on his life, and she witnessed one of them where some lady jumped right onto the side of the cars that went through a parade, but the Gestapo caught him first, and it never happened. But she said we were just stuck. If you spoke out against the Nazi Party in any way, you were extracted from your family and put in a prison camp or shot, or you just lived with what you had to live with, and that was kind of the philosophy of life.
I'm sure that most Germans didn't realize what they were getting into when he came to power, because the Nazi Party became very, very powerful, and it was their way or the highway.
Yes, well, but where Irmgard lived was in Freistadt, and it was really very remote. And she, as a little girl growing up, just enjoyed it. All the men were gone for the war, but essentially they didn't even know a war was going on for a long time. And so
I'm going to kind of point that out here for the audience here real quick of where Ingrid is from, or when Irmgard was from. So Irmgard there's these two peninsulas right here at the Baltic Sea, and she was right here at that northernmost peninsula, and just right here at the base of that, they're in that kind of the East Prussia area. So she said growing up that she was 2 miles from
the beach.
The beach where she could ride her bike to.
Yeah.
And then she was how many miles from the Russian border there?
She said about 150 miles, but to Lithuania, and Lithuania at that time belonged to Russia.
Yeah, so she right here about 150 miles from where she was to that Lithuanian border, which was controlled by Russia at the time. And her father kept writing
and saying things are going badly for us. So, but the scenario was that there was no men in the city, except those that were disabled or too young or too old, and there was one doctor that had a car, and he'd go around through the community, and that man blessed a lot of people because the communication was not really good, and when the Russians started to break through, you could hear the cannons and the tanks in the distance blowing up the countryside, but they had no way of knowing when to get out. And this doctor once said, hey, it's up north, they're broken through, get out. And so he was going around from house to house and warning people. And that's when Irmgard and her mother grabbed their little kits and ran out the door. And it was in the middle of January in 1945, or 44, I mean. And it was literally very cold, and they went cross-country to a train, and then the train didn't show up. And the scenario was that there were just about maybe 1,500 to 2,000 people in that little town, and there were about 300,000 refugees going through it. And so the Germans made a big push to try to hold the Russians back long enough for the civilians to get out. And they were...
Can you tell us what the Russians were doing, why it was so important? Because most people don't know what the Russians were doing to civilians at the time.
Well, that was one of the biggest fears they had as they left. To get caught by the Russians was really... They were raping and killing everybody as long. It was payback time. And one of Irmgard's girlfriends got caught by the Russians, and they locked her up, and then every night whole units would rape her. and she was just never the same. She never married, and she was emotionally just a wreck. And that was one of their big fears. Just stay away from the Germans, away from the Russians, get away. And
with her being that close to the border too, it was pretty hard. I mean, during the war, they hadn't heard much at all about the war because they're pretty remote, so they don't really know.
They heard about it. They heard about it. It was kind of, but it was, it was a long distance away. They had an aunt that sent one of their cousins to live with them because the big cities were getting bombed so badly, and just sent there for safety. But the war was just something to talk about. It wasn't. The only thing is that she had a Jewish friend, Ruth, and they were playing, and then one day she just disappeared. And she says, now I know what happened because they were blowing up the synagogues, and she says, I don't know whether they went to prison or whether they just fled, but she just disappeared. And she said, as a little girl, I didn't understand it. I just knew that she'd gone, and I didn't know anything about Jews. And her mother had an idea about what was going on, but like I said, you couldn't talk her to bring it up. So
it had been incredibly difficult to not know what's going on, and all of a sudden, just the Russians are coming, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
because they're not getting any type of news or information at all as to what's happening on the German side or the Russian side or the American side.
No, they had no idea what was going on except their lives were being threatened. And I know when they went back, the Germans made that big push, and then they sent them home again. Said, "Well, hey, we're winning, we're doing okay," but then that wasn't the case, and it pushed. They started pushing, and then they had to get out again, and they ran to the train. And Irmgard, when she went back, she being a little girl, she went in and hid all of her dolls and unscrewed the light bulbs so the Russians couldn't see them and find them. And then
how old was she at this time?
She was 12.
She was 12 when
and
Germany was falling in 44.
Yeah,
there.
And so she was, she was little enough to know what was going on a little bit, but not really have a vision about what was going on. But as she knows, she went to the train station this time, and the train did show up. And she said there was a little station master there, and he was loading all these women and children on the train, and a big old Nazi came up and says, "I'm commandeering that train for military purposes." And she said that little man was a whole head shorter than that big Nazi, and he says, "You are not taking this train." And the Nazi threatened to shoot him. And he says, "These women and children are getting on this train, and then you can shoot me." And he did. They loaded him up. And he left, and they don't know what happened to him, but there's a pretty good chance he did get shot.
At least he got the women. I mean, that's pretty sacrificial.
Yeah, he saved their lives that day. Yeah. And then, of course, they moved deeper into Germany, and that whole scenario was, as they moved into Germany, it was just terror, I know, for her mom especially. And she was young enough to be afraid, but not young enough to or not old enough to understand a lot that was going on.
How old do you think her mom was at the time?
She must have been, I imagine, about 40.
About 40.
Somewhere in that ballpark.
And they hadn't heard from their father much during the war at all.
Well, just periodically, periodically they sent letters to her, and he was telling them it's going badly for us, to be prepared to get out. So they had an idea that they were going to have to leave.
And he was on the Russian side, the Russian front.
Yeah.
No idea which battles he was in, or if he was in Stalingrad or any of those other major battles.
There's a book out that talks about his unit, paperback that talked about his unit, and told a lot of the stories that went on. I heard more about that through a manual than I did from him.
From him.
And but he was an enlisted man, and he was in a tank killer team, infantry. So he was involved in up front trying to destroy tanks. So he must have had a lot of heavy experiences, but he didn't talk about it a lot. And I just had a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, those tank crews are pretty busy. I mean, he was probably driving a Panzer or something like that. And
yeah, well, he was infantry, so he was probably protecting the Panzers, and I know the Germans had a very rigid structure of officer enlisted. And he had this vision about what a German officer was. And that was a little bit of a problem over the years, because I became a lieutenant colonel, and so he always saw me as an officer, and it was just almost like if I said something, aye, aye, sir, 3 bags full, without any question, and yet he didn't. I don't know. It was a unique experience to be with him, and he was a good man in so many ways. I had a lot of respect for him, and he was very independent. I brought him I had him here in Layton, and I know he used to have a wheelchair that the Germans had issued to him, and he'd had cancer in his back, and he survived that, but he got walking around on crutches, but he wanted to go around a little bit. So he'd get this wheelchair the Germans issued to him, and it had headlights and a stoplight and signal lights and a little...
On a wheelchair?
Yeah, and a little Naga hide protector to keep the weather off.
Oh, that's a nice wheelchair.
Yeah, and it'd go about 3 hours, and he'd go from my place all the way up to Hill Air Force Base and all the way over to the mall, and he'd just drive around. And one day there was a polluted area between us and Hill Air Force Base, and I gave him a little piece of paper that says, "I'm all right. I don't need any help, or I need some help. Here's my phone number." And so people jabber something to him, and he never did learn English. I tried to teach him, and he said, "I learned Polish and English and forgot them, and I'm not interested." And so he never even tried to learn English, and he would just take off and go. And he went over there, and I get this phone call from this guy in that polluted area. It was a bunch of oil drums, and I don't know what all was in there. They were trying to clean it up. He calls me up and says, "Will you come and get this guy? He's just going around this place, and I can't get him to understand. He's not supposed to wheel around through here." So I went over and picked him up. And then another thing is he liked pickled pig's feet. And doesn't sound enticing, but he loved it. And we found that over at the local grocery store. And I found that and then cream, and I found it and gave it to him. And he kept asking me to give it to him. And I brought some back. It must have gone bad, or it was bad or something. But he said, "It doesn't taste very good. That's no good." And I said, "Well, I'll take it back." And he says, "No, I'll do it." I said, "How are you going to do it? You don't speak English." He says, "I'll do it." And he left. And when he come back, and he had one little jar of pickled pig's feet. And I said, "What did you do?" He says, "I went in there and I found one of these store employees, and I went over there and I held it up and I says, 'Das schmeckt überhaupt nicht. Yuck.'" And he says, "The guy just took it out of my hand and got one off the shelf and handed it to me, and I came home."
All there is to it, right?
Yeah,
all there is to it.
He didn't mind. He didn't mind doing things like that. And when we were in Fort Leavenworth, he had a way he'd like to go to town, and he'd go to town all the time. And one night he didn't come back, and I thought, "What's going on?" And I know he's got headlights and signal lights and all that, but it's late. I thought maybe I better go find him. So they had some construction on the route where he was going, and he got lost, and he was off wandering around somewhere. And I see police lights in the distance, and I thought, I better go over there and look. I went over there. Yeah, he'd shown them this little thing. Here's my phone and address. I need help. And they didn't call me. They just were giving him a police escort home. The lights were flashing, and they were leading the wheelbarrow or the wheelchair and coming home.
I could only picture that. That's pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he was quite a guy. So.
Well, it sounds like one thing, it's a miracle he survived the war without...
It is.
It's an absolute miracle he survived the war.
In fact, if he hadn't survived, I'd have never met my wife, because we were up there by Denmark and in that farming district, and they were not treating refugees very nice. That was another thing that was a problem, because the Red Cross had put them in this Schleswig-Holstein, Schegerot was the city, and people didn't like refugees. They were treating them as second-class citizens, but the Red Cross expected them, if they had room, to put somebody in there. So when they first went, they went there to a school, and they put them in this school. Well, she ran around as a little girl, and but she was always hungry, and they had a contingent of army there, just a small detachment, and they made food for her there for the soldiers. So once in a while she'd go through the kitchen, and some nice cook would give her something to eat, and that was always nice. And but then they moved over into a home, and this was a farmer, and he had coal and heat and farm. He had eggs and everything, and he wouldn't share any of that with them. The only heat they got was what came through the walls between, and they wouldn't let them have any heat. And her mom milked cows, probably for a liter of milk, and that's what they lived on. And if her father hadn't come home, they'd have stayed there. But her father showed up one day, and things started to change, and he went out and stripped down some fence posts and started burning that for heat. And the guy remembered he had some coal they could use, and things changed when he survived. But that was an interesting story too. When they released him from Russia, he had no way of knowing where they were, and there were millions of people never got together. But you were required to go into a city to register. So when they got to Shegorot, they just registered like they were supposed to. Well, today's computer would be nothing. They'd distribute that throughout the country, and you could see in a minute. But that wasn't the case then. And so he goes from town to town looking at these rosters and trying to find his family. He didn't even know if they were alive, and they didn't know if he was alive. They didn't even know if he'd been captured or where he was or anything. But
that just goes for an undying spirit. You have no idea, but you're not going to stop looking.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Which is crazy that he devoted that much time, just city by city, town by town, just
looking through a roster,
just hoping that his family's still alive.
Yeah.
How long did that take?
I don't even know. He came home in '47, and when they released him, and I don't even know how long it took him, or how many cities he went through. I just know all at once he found their name, and one day he just showed up. And
what a wonderful father! I mean, he was dedicated to finding them.
Yeah, and that speaks highly of him. But at the same time, from '39 when they went into Poland till '47 when he was released, only home 4 times. They were different people, and you didn't get a divorce then, but they didn't love each other anymore. They just lived together, and he felt a big responsibility and a lot of love for his daughter. And
well, nowadays we understand what PTSD is too.
Yeah.
And he had to have had a lot of it.
I would imagine he did. He didn't show it when he was living with us, but he was a go-getter, and I know why he was a survivor. He just pushed and did what he had to do. He got cancer toward the end of his life. He got cancer in his back, and he was laying on a bed, paralyzed, for 3 years. They told him, "You will never walk again. You just as well accept it. You're on that bed." He says, "I will walk again." And one day, his mom and Irmgard showed up over there. Irmgard showed up there in Germany, and he says, "Look," and he's moving his toe, just a little bit like that. And surprising to doctors, he got up and walked. He had to use little crutches, but he got up and walked after that, and they told him he wouldn't. And they told him he was only going to live 6 months. He lived 12 years. And he just was a pusher. I had a lot of respect for that guy. He'd gone through a lot in his life. And
I can only imagine what he saw in war.
Yeah.
I mean, it was World War II was brutal.
It was.
Both the Germans and the Russians were pretty ruthless on both sides.
They were. When they went into Russia, the Russians were the enemy, and they had an opportunity to let some of those people were so glad to get away from communism that they welcomed the Germans. But the Germans didn't treat them that way. They killed a lot of their political people and turned them against them, and that's probably part of the reason they lost the war in Russia. Is if they'd have used some of those people, they'd have jumped in with the Germans and helped fight against the Russians. And he saw all of that, and I don't know what he was required to do or not do, but I just imagine because of the atrocities that took place, he was required to do things that were really against his standards, and he had no choice. And but things keep cropping up that there were good people on both sides, like his commander.
We all know that. There's always
Yeah.
good people. I mean, when you're forced into military service and you don't have a choice, then... And we were talking about that last week at the convention about Mexico and the cartels. It's carrot and stick, right? Here's a whole bunch of money, or I kill you.
Yeah, that's right.
The decision isn't difficult.
An interesting story about that was on my mission, one mission president was sent him, they changed him in the middle of it, and he was sent there to buy land to build churches and so he was going from city to city, and in the city where Irmgard was, he went into the courthouse and asked for some ground to build a church. And they asked questions and said, no, we don't have anything. And so he was kind of discouraged, and leaving the church, he went down the steps, and a man coming up the steps says, did you get what you needed? And he says, no. And he says, well, what is it you're after? So he told him too. And he says, you come with me. And they went in, and he found a piece of ground that was in the middle of that city, and just a beautiful place for a church. And it turned out that this man had been a prisoner of war in an American prison camp. And his commander happened to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he treated him so fairly that he said, the first Mormon I see, I'm going to help. And President Richards happened to be that man, and so he got a piece of ground for the church. And I thought,
miracles do happen.
Yeah, there's good people on every side doing good stuff, and I want to talk about that. She talked about as a little girl going through a field and walking down a railroad track, and some American fighter probably headed home from after a mission and picking targets of opportunity, decided that she and her mother was a target of opportunity, and so they were strafed as they running down the railroad track. And she said, there's your Americans, your good guys. And I said, well, there's bad guys on both sides. It was probably obvious that was a little girl, and still, they were enemies at that time. And she talked about when she was a little girl, the tanks going by after the Americans took over. At some point, these tanks were going down the road, and the Americans were throwing chocolate out to the little kids on the side. And she said, they were my enemy, so I just stepped on the chocolate until they disappeared, and then I'd pick it up. She said, my mom saw that, and boy, did I get in a lot of trouble.
I bet. So let's go to Irmgard. And so you have the pastor, whoever it was, that was there, had the car, and he's announcing the Russians have broken through.
Yes.
So now they're said we got to get up and go.
Yes, and her mother decided, I think, most of the time to travel by train, and
so that was right in the town they were living in, or did they have to travel to get to it?
No, they had to walk quite a different distance to find a train initially, and I guess thereafter, wherever they got off of some train, they got to get on a train, and they didn't know where it was going. As long as it was moving deeper into Germany, that's the direction they were going. And there was the Red Cross. She said the Red Cross really helped them a lot. She said she found out you could exist with the helping of people that along the way. You got little crumbs here and there. It wasn't much, and her mother traded food rations and alcohol rations on the black market for food initially, but that didn't last very long because she took whatever she could, but it didn't last very long.
Did she leave with another family from her town, or just them on their own?
Them. They were on their own, and they
no siblings or anything.
Well, she had one brother died when he was born, and otherwise his father was away, so there were no more children in the family, which was probably one of the big reasons they survived, because in one time they were on a train of nothing but women and children moving deeper into Germany, and the train stopped probably because of shooting up front, and a soldier jumped on the train and said, you need to get off of this train. It's the middle of January and they're on a big embankment. So her mother just slid open the door and jumped off and rolling down through the snow. They found themselves in the middle of a combat, Germans and Russians fighting hand-to-hand combat. They were zigzagging, running through them, being shot at. they looked back and the engine blew up. And 3 teenagers jumped off the train with them. So they were following with Irmgard and her mother and just running. And they, in fact, those 3 teenagers stayed with them the rest of the time. But they looked back, and then after the engine blew up, the whole train blew up. As far as they know, they were the only 5 survivors on that whole women and children train. They just shelled it and completely destroyed it.
It had been a couple hundred.
Yeah. It was car after car of just women and children, and I don't have any idea how many there, but the people that were on there, the mother of the 3 teenagers had other little kids, and she couldn't get. She said, "I had to get them ready. You follow that lady," and they jumped off the train, and Mom stayed to get the little one ready and didn't make it. So, so that happened time and time again. That her mom made decisions that just kept them alive. At one point in time, they were sitting in a train too. It was an interesting thing that they were sitting in a train, and it's been sitting there for hours, just sitting. And Irmgard had to go to the bathroom, and her mom says, "Well, there's one on the platform. Go ahead and go." So she jumped off the train to go to the bathroom, and immediately the train started to move. And fortunately, there was a lady there, grabbed her, and threw her back on the train. And her mother panicked and jumped off the train. So her mother was on the ground, and she was on the train. And this same lady said, "If you're looking for a little girl, she's on the train." And so she jumped on a moving train, and they worked their way back and found each other. But there were thousands of people who didn't experience that, that lost.
Just got separated.
Yeah. And Irmgard wondered many times if that lady even survived the war, what she did for them, saved their lives together. So.
So going back to this map here, so they're in this East Prussia up here next to the Black Sea area up here, and they're trying to, I would imagine, go towards this Stutthof and just deeper into Germany, right?
They were moving west pretty much, and they wound up close to Denmark, running down the far end side, 800 miles. So that's where they wound up. But they did go past places like Danzig, where there were thousands and thousands of people being extracted out by ship. And her mother decided to stay with the train. And but they came there, and ship after ship was leaving.
Yeah, right there in the port. So Danzig right here had a big port, and they were trying to get people out.
Yeah,
ship.
they had a lot of people there, but there was I read a story about this there was a Russian submariner that had been patrolling the Baltic Sea there for quite a while, and with no success. He was no success at all. And all at once there was German boats going everywhere. And even though they were clearly marked with red crosses, they were loaded with just wounded soldiers and women and children trying to get out. And yet he'd had, I guess, totally unsuccess in the war, and he sunk 3 of those ships.
Was this a German sub or was it a Russian sub?
A Russian sub.
Russian sub.
Yeah, and sunk 3 of those, and there were thousands of people that were
on
lost.
board each of those ships.
Yeah, and one of them was one of them that survived was Irmgard's mother's aunt, or Irmgard's aunt. And she made it onto the train, onto the boat, and it was sunk. And I think there were only 83 people that survived, and she happened to be one of them. But she was in the water, cold water, for a long time, which influenced her health down the road. But she survived. But Irmgard's mother said, "I think we'll stay with the trains," and kept going, and which probably was good.
Yeah.
And then they went on down. At one point in time, there were just 2 cars on a train that they caught. And her mother, as they were moving, they were shooting at the train, and soldiers standing in the doorway shooting back. And her mother just threw a mattress over the top of her, just to do anything. And she was laying so she could see out the door, so she could see what was as the train was going by, that they were shooting and what was going on. And the little girl in the train behind them they blew both of her legs off in a detonation, and at the next stop, when the train made it through and stopped, she just saw them taking the little girl off. And so there were things like that happened over and over again. And I know at one point in time they were off the train, and they were going through a city that had been bombed a lot. And of course the Americans were bombing at night, and the Brits were bombing at night and Americans daytime, and so they'd put a little bit of something together to just some kind of shelter, and they'd get a warning, hear the sign, and they'd run into a bunker. And she says that was terrifying because bombs dropping all around the bunker, and it was just shaking even though it was a big bunker. And she just was terrified of what was going on the whole time. And then they'd come out, and whatever it was they set up for a place to stay was totally destroyed. And that was where she stayed overnight, I guess, with the lady and her two daughters. And Irmgard's mother said, "Let's go find something to eat," and left. And when they came back, the lady and the two kids were all dead. So her mother just made decisions like that over and over again, and
just happened to leave at the right time when they got bombed.
Left at the right time and made it through, and she listened to that Poland guy that said get out, and left there. That was back by Danzig.
So it sounds like as they're leaving, that Russia was just like hot on their tails. Like
it really was.
As fast as the trains were moving, Russia was taking over. So it wasn't like they were staying very, very far ahead of the Russian advance.
Yeah, that was the thing I gathered too. That there were certain points there were lulls in the war, but they were just afraid the Russians were going to catch them, and so they were just running. And of course, because of the war scenario, one train after the next was being destroyed, and the railroad tracks and their supply lines and everything. And so and then the Russians were just unmerciful with anybody they caught. So they were just in fear all the time. And so when she got to Schleswig-Holstein and they stopped, it was kind of a relief because the war ended at the time with them when they were there. But
where is that located at?
That's right up by Denmark, just a few miles from Denmark. As you on that left side there, just where
maybe just up here on the German side.
Yeah.
So what made them make the choice to go towards Denmark and not towards Berlin?
They just, I don't know that they made the choice. They just were on a train and trying to move deeper into Germany. And this train, and the Red Cross was kind of filtering them to areas that were less affected by the war. And this Schegerot was a farming district and hadn't been bombed. Many of these towns, the Americans and Brits had just destroyed the train stations, and that's all. And this town was strictly agricultural, and they hardly knew the war was even going on. And so when they settled there, the war was just about over, and they wound up staying there, and the school started back up. The war was ended, and the school started up, and they were. We talked about the amount of food they got. That was trouble, but when the schools did start up, she was now getting a little bit older as she stayed there, and her school. High school was 10 kilometers away. And so she had to go 10 kilometers to school and stay to school and 10 kilometers back. And here where they were staying, there were only 3 kids that were going to high school, and she and 2 others. And Emil was the oldest boy of the 2, and they had a horse and buggy, and they told her she could ride with them. So she got to ride to school and back. And Emil and she became really close, and he proposed marriage as time went on, because they were there till she was 22 years old, and he proposed marriage, but the scenario was if you were a refugee, you were an outcast, and the parents said, you marry a refugee, you're getting nothing. And so that kind of fell apart, which was good for me. But
so how much of her journey do you think was via train, and how much was walking?
most of it was train. Yeah, they'd get off of one train and try to walk to another train station and get on another one. And as a little girl, she didn't remember a whole lot of that. She just remembers riding on the train mostly. She does remember
how packed the trains were, or how many people.
You know, I don't recall her even talking about that. I do remember that she said she was running across a frozen field one time, and her mother was had a hold of her hand, and she kept falling down, and then she realized she was falling over frozen bodies under the snow, and they were running and trying to get to another train, and it was just happenstance whether you caught a train or didn't.
Now the trains they were catching, were they trains with seats, where they were actually in like a car?
Many of them were boxcars.
Or just standing in a boxcar?
Yeah. The one that blew up was a regular train, I thought, but she talked about sliding the doors open on the side. So I think that sounds like a boxcar. And
they were just stuffing people in it.
Yeah. And here it's in the middle of January, so they weren't very warm and nice and comfortable. And so it was just terror from one time to the next. So
I can't even imagine, because middle of January is freezing cold in those German areas and Russian areas.
Up by her areas, up close to Russia, it was really cold, and so.
Did she mention anything about what type of apparel they had, if they were even prepared for that type of a journey?
Well, they were being prepared by the letters of her father, so that she had, but they only had 3 little bags. Irmgard had a small bag. And
she had like good clothes, boots.
Yeah, just this essentials, and her mother took all of the things that she thought she could use and sell, to get food. And she had 2 bags and an extra coat. And her mother was a really, really a top-notch person. And Irmgard had their little bag, and the 3 they had the clothes on their back and those 3 bags, and they were running. And her mother had that extra coat. And her mother, being the caliber of person she was, she found somebody who didn't have a coat and gave it away. And that's amazing to me. Somebody, you can't replace it. You were using it for a blanket to keep warm at night, and and you take compassion on someone who didn't have one. And that spoke really highly to me, for me to think about that sacrifice that she did. And they just ran from one place to the next, and it was panic and pandemonium the whole time.
Do you know how long they were on the run for?
About 4 months.
So the traveling from, look at this again. So from traveling from that East Prussia area to just south of Denmark took them 4 months just to go that distance.
Yeah.
And what do you think the mileage on that? Maybe
it's 800 miles, about 800 miles.
800 miles.
Yeah. So
4 months to go 800 miles.
Yeah.
So in 4 months, they had to have seen a lot.
Yes. And one particular time, they were waiting for a train to come, and some lady had a horse and covered wagon and said, "We got room. You can come with us." And her mother said, "I think I'll wait for the train." And so they went, and the lady took off, and the train finally came, and they got in the train. When they went down a little ways, where the side road came to cross the train, here was the horse and the wagon and all those people, and they were dead. So if they'd have gone with them, they'd have been dead too.
They just saw them off the side of the train tracks. All of them dead.
Yeah, they saw the horse and the wagon just destroyed as they went by. And
she's just seeing destruction everywhere.
Why do you think they were preserved?
Well, I've always felt like that her mother had some inspiration. She had a gut feeling about certain things, and she was a good person, and she made decisions, probably maybe she didn't even know she was being led, but I think she was like when they went looking for food, you know, at the right time, and then come back and those 3 were dead. There was time and time again her mother made decisions not to go on the boat, to stay on the train, to keep moving on the train when it stopped, or to get off the train when it did stop. And I just felt like there was some eternal guidance there. I've always felt that way.
How much, like, actual battles did she see during that time? I mean, well, if the Russians were that close to them, they had to have seen. I mean, you mentioned the one scene where they were literally running through the battle itself.
Yeah.
I mean, did she give you any detail about that battle or any others that she was seeing? She
didn't a lot. Mostly, it sounded like to me from most of over the years that they were far enough away they could hear the artillery and the tanks blowing up the countryside, but far enough away that they were not right involved in it, and that's what their goal was, is to get as far away from those gunshots and cannon and as they could, so the Russians didn't catch them. And so I think that was influencing a lot of how they went. I went back with her about 10 years ago. We decided to go back. I wanted to go back and see as much as I could see from where she started and where she wound up, and as much as she could remember. And so we started her at her hometown, and her whole city was blown away. That little town was often they had one main street, and the buildings were on both sides, and in hers they were on both sides, and at the end of them there was a church. And the Russians, when they started through and the Germans made that big stand, the Russians shelled that whole town. And when we went back, the church was standing and everything else was grass. Her hometown was all gone.
Non-existent anymore.
It was all blown away and everything.
And not even rebuilt then.
No. But 10 kilometers away, her grandmother's house survived. We went over and saw it, and it was built back with 3 different colored bricks. And it looked a little shabby, but it had survived, and the Polish people had built it back together, built it back, and then we went and tried to go through Danzig and see that harbor and how congested it must have been. And then we went back to Schleswig-Holstein, where her husband, or her fiance, I guess he was at one time, and he was the city mayor, and he'd also been a county commissioner. And when we got there, they were having a city festival, and she and I went over to the festival, and we found out that he was over there. We went over there, and 4 people remembered her after 50 years.
Wow.
And we met him, and talked with him for a little while, and his wife wasn't right sure an old girlfriend coming back after 50 years was a good idea, but
50 years is a long time, though.
Yeah, and we went over there and became really good friends with him, and we spent the better part of a day with him, and that was very interesting. But it was also another interesting thing that all the years she went from there into Dortmund, became an engineer, went to Britain as an exchange student, got another proposal there, and a British guy said, "We're not having a German in my family," and so all of that, and she went all the way in that distance, and we've kept in contact with Emil all those years. And even after we were married, I sent him an email, and I used to get Christmas cards and emails from him and his family, and I sent a little email back saying that Irmgard had passed, but all those years, he'd been keeping in contact. So
that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
So she gets finally here south of Denmark, and they find, what was that city they finally settled in?
Skæggerup.
Skæggerup. And in Skæggerup, she was there for...
Till 1945, actually, let's see, the war was over in 45, so she was there till she was 22, so she was quite a few years there. She was.
So she got there and she was still 12, or was she 13, 12, 13 there, or?
She was about 12 the whole time until she got there, and then she stayed there until she went to high school, so she was there for quite a while till she was about 14 or 15. And so they were there probably 3 or 4 years.
And at what point did her dad finally find them?
Well, he came back in 47, so sometime right after.
So 2 years. She'd been there for maybe 2 years.
Yeah, they'd been there for 2 years when he showed up, and then he was a farmer without a farm, so he had to learn a new occupation, and because of the bombing, there was lots of construction, so somebody hired him as a steel worker. And he used to go into these big bombed-out cities and start building and doing construction. And the government started moving refugees' families. So he'd go on a little moped, we call it, just a little motorbike, and ride there and go to work for all week or 2 weeks and then come back on the weekend. And the government finally just picked his whole family up and moved them. They gave him a place to live in Dortmund, and they moved down to Dortmund, and that's.
Where's Dortmund at?
That's deeper into Germany, and it's south, kind of, let's see, south. It's almost straight south from. It's in what they call the Ruhrgebiet. It was the industrial area during the war, so it was really bombed heavily, and it was probably. I imagine.
So maybe, I mean, was it as far south as Berlin, maybe, or?
No, it wasn't. Maybe not quite that far, and it's further west from Berlin, and.
So maybe next to this Nenningen.
Yeah, and.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is a World War II map, and we could have found a better map, but.
Yeah, so it's really kind of hard to see, but it was probably a 3 or 4 hour trip.
Yeah, that would make sense.
To go south into that, and because the bombing was on the big cities, and that was an industrial city, Dortmund was, and so the bombers were hitting that city a lot, trying to keep the industry from preparing and sending war machines out. So,
so why did they choose that city to make a high school then?
Well, the high school was in Schegerot. That was that was 10 kilometers away from Schegerot, where the school started up, and there was enough refugees in that area that's where it got started really well. And an interesting thing too is she was there until she graduated at 14. At 14, the German system is that you take a test. If you pass this test, you go on to college. If you don't, you go into some kind of a technology school, carpentry or electronics or whatever. And she was
at 14 years of age.
Yeah, and so there she passed the test, and then as the war ended.
Where did she get enough schooling to pass the test?
I don't know. You know, I know the German system. Well, the school started up, and so from 12 until she started high school, she was. The Germans they've got a school system that's really pretty strict. It's only a half day. They only go till noon, but they give you enough homework. It lasts the rest of the day, you know, and you better come back squared away. And she talked about being educated in college, and they don't just give you a test. You go to a class and they give you a test at the end of the class. As you get to the end, they have an interview, and you come in, and anything you learned in college the whole years you're there, whatever it is subject to be asked.
So it's a completely
comprehensive test. And there's got a bunch of professors sitting around there and asking what happened to your freshman year and how about that class. And she says that was a scary one. They had a written test and then they had this verbal test from in front of all these professors. And she said that was a lot of stress to that. And but another thing was she had the privilege to go to. Her mom sent her to an all-girls school after. I don't know at what point that was. It must have been after high school, and it was an all-girls.
So she was officially out of high school at 14?
Yeah, No, 14. Yeah.
14, she took the test, and she was considered done with high school.
Yeah, you can go on to college from there, and
she'd had a lot of life experience by that time, also.
Yeah, and she went to this agriculture school. It was all girls school, and when I went back with her, we went over there, and it was on the weekend, and all the girls. The school was still there, and all the girls on the weekend had gone home, and there was a gardener there, and she took us through the school, and it was really good walking down a little memory lane with that. She went through and showed us all the classrooms, and things were pretty much the same. And standing on the wall was a picture of her and her girlfriends doing gymnastics in that school after all those years.
Still on the wall.
Yeah, it was really a kind of a nice experience. But then she graduated. Oh, that was another interesting thing she said.
How many years after that was that?
She must have been 17 or 18. Or 19, I guess.
So she was 17, 18 when the picture was taken. Then how many years after that did you guys go back and see the picture still there?
Oh, well, she was in her 60s or 70s.
So
yeah,
50
still there.
50 plus years or 40 plus years later.
I think
40 years later.
Yeah, and she talks about as a girl, she always wanted to be taller. So she'd stand in the doorway, get over and stand in the doorway and stretch to see if she'd get a little bigger. And she said she had a girlfriend that was top heavy, and she got some cream somewhere, and she'd rub on it every night so it'd shrink it a little bit. And she says, nevertheless, as time went on, I was still short, and she was still top heavy. And she says the girls used to go then on a hill. They'd go out in the woods there, and there was a little hill there by, and they'd go up on top of the hill, and they'd all strip down and get in the sun. And there was a helicopter military training center a while ago, and the train would go by, or the helicopter would go by, and she said, we noticed it kept coming back, so every time we heard a helicopter, we had to run for cover. And but she said she learned an awful lot there, life's experiences, how to work and how to dress and how to act as a lady, and she says, but I graduated as in agriculture, and he says, I didn't have a farm, so I had to go somewhere else. So she moved deeper into Germany when her father moved there, and she became a civil engineer. When I met her, she was a civil engineer working in a big company and earning more than an average German, and here I was a young Marine, been on a mission, and I was just a big dumb farmer, and she spoke
civil
about
engineer.
Art, history.
So how did she become a civil engineer, and at what age did she become a civil engineer?
I don't know. I met her when she was 30 when I met her, and she was a civil engineer then, and she had been in school. I don't know. She probably only been working a couple of years then.
And she'd already been married and widowed by this time.
She what?
She had already been married and widowed by this time.
She was married then. She married another civil engineer in college, and he apparently was a genius. Because the kids were other students, even other engineers, had come and ask him questions, and even though he was a student, he was solving problems for them all the time, and he was very good in everything. I don't know why she ever settled for me. He knew art. He liked to go skiing. He liked opera and operetta. She loved all of that kind of stuff, and they just became friends. And somewhere along the way, they came. She said there never was in our marriage. There never was any sparks flying, but we were good friends. And before that, they sent her to England. That's where she learned her English. When I met her, she spoke like a blimey bloke, but she spoke English. And she had gone to England as an exchange student, and now she spent one summer there with a family, and they had a young man named Taft who was about his age, and they became pretty close. And he proposed marriage, and that's when she got to the train on the way home, her father said, "We can't have a German in a British family, no." And so it fell apart. And that's when she then went home. She got married. It was interesting too. The Germans have a a lot of them have a great suspicion or a superstition. She got married, and when she went out the door, and the bride is a bride, a wind caught her dress and ripped in the veil, ripped a little hole in her veil. And these ladies that were helping her, ooh, bad luck, bad luck. And years later, her husband was killed, and said, bad luck, bad luck. And it was funny that she went. They went on a honeymoon, and when she got back, she found out she was pregnant, and then just 8 months later, her husband went on a motorcycle to see his parents, took her parents' motorcycle and went, and the police showed up on the door and said he's been in an accident. They went in, he had a bad brain injury, and they did an operation, and he died. And the little baby was then born right after. He had water on his lungs, and she was fighting for her life too, and it wasn't a good delivery. And with all that was going on there, that's one of those things where, it's trauma just seemed to follow her, and so then that's when she then graduated and moved on as a engineer.
So this whole time, from her youth to become an engineer, did her family have any type of belief in God or any type of religious experiences at all?
Yeah, and during the war, the Germany was pretty well broken up in Lutheran, which they called evangelisch, or Catholic. And the whole cities were either Catholic or they were Lutheran. I guess years before, they'd driven each other out of the city, and so it was all Catholic or all. But during the war, so many refugees going different places, they were mixed back up again. But her mother was very strong Lutheran, and her father, he claimed he didn't believe in God after the war. He said there's just no God to allow this to happen. But he was an interesting man, because when I was in the Army, we traveled all over. Every 3 years they'd move us, and it didn't matter where we were. I'd be traveling around with him, and he'd say, "There's a church. There's a church." And everywhere we'd go, he'd acknowledge, "There's a church." Then when we got in Utah, "There's a church, there's a church, there's a church." And he quit doing it. But it was really interesting that he didn't believe. He claimed he didn't believe in God, but yet he would point out a church.
Yeah, I suspect differently.
So I guess he knows now there is. So, anyway.
Well, I mean, you can't not listen to this story and have a lot of providence in it, because they survived when a lot of people didn't. And they saw a lot of death.
Yeah, they did.
They saw a lot of death. So something went right. So did she ever talk about her mother doing any prayers or anything else like that along the journey? Or?
Yeah, she did. Interestingly enough, when I met her, she was 10 kilometers away from where I was living, and we used to go to church right close by. And we showed up one morning early, and she was not home, and we thought, well, let's talk to a few people here. And we happened to knock on her mother's door, and her mother said, "I'm not interested, but my daughter reads the Bible a lot." And Irmgard, after her husband's death, was asking a lot of questions. Where is my husband? What is he doing? What's going on? And so here we show up, and her mother says, "No, you can come back and see my daughter." Well, a month later, I wrote a call back in the book, and a month later we come back, and we said, "We got a call back here we never saw." So we went up and knocked on the door, and here it was on a Sunday morning, and she was just too polite to throw us out. And she wanted, she had a little one. She was leaving home with Mom, and she was going to go swimming with her girlfriends. And she said, "Well, you can come back later." So we did. And we came back, and because she was asking so many questions, we talked about the plan of salvation first. And that was our last lesson in German. And we talked about that, and I wrote in my journal when we left, "This lady's going to become a member with." And so we left, and we came back, and normally when somebody joins the church, they just go into the ward or the branch, and the missionaries move on. But on the in-law side of the house, there was a man who specialized in discrediting the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and so he'd come back and stir the pot. And she felt good about the church, but she didn't have the knowledge to back it up. And so she kept calling us back to answer questions, and that's when all at once I realized I liked her, and I thought, you don't do that. You're on a mission. You're not supposed to be liking somebody. And we just kind of, then I got transferred after that, and I never saw her except in a conference in the next year, and then I decided I wanted to go see her. So when I come back, we got through with my mission. Well, I had to report for my mission president, and I was done. And so I sent a letter and said, I'd like to come back and see you. And then I told my mission president I wanted to go back and see her. And he said, well, are you going to stay in Germany? And I said, probably not. And he says, my advice to you then is go home. You don't know what American girls are like anymore. But I thought, I can't do that. I sent her a letter saying I'm coming. So I went back and saw her 2 days. And then me and another missionary went around all of Europe. We went to Sweden, Denmark, Italy, everywhere, and came back and saw her 2 more days. And I said, if you got enough nerve to come to America, I got enough nerve to marry you. And she said, okay. So we only dated 4 days. And we had 57 years together, so it was good.
4 days and 57 years. Yeah. That is pretty amazing.
Yeah, we had a good time.
So what was the family reaction, her family reaction to the proposal?
Her father offered her a Mercedes if she'd stay and dump me. And so she traded me for a Mercedes. I felt pretty blessed. And her mother says, are you sure you're not just converted to broad shoulders and the good looks? Maybe you better take this easy. But and it was a dirty trick, you know. She had only grandchild, and I picked her up and moved her from there to America, and that was a dirty trick for her. But it sure solved some in-law problems. I didn't have any.
And she had a degree in agriculture, yet she wasn't really akin to your farmer lifestyle.
Well, no, she fit in all right with the agriculture stuff, but she liked a big city. She come from a city of 500,000 in Dortmund, and then went to Pingree, 300 people, and she didn't. And the coyotes were howling around the Snake River, and people had told her rattlesnakes jump out of the trees and bite you, so be careful. And she didn't know how to adjust to that, and so there was a little skepticism there.
A massive change going from Germany and the war and all that to
it really was.
No man's land in the middle of nowhere, Idaho.
And if anybody should have had PTSD, it should have been her, and she never did reflect that. She did have a little thing once in a while, a couple of times. One time in the hospital, she got a high fever, and she reverted back to being a little girl, and that was pretty emotional. I came in and she didn't recognize me, and she said, I know you're the soldier that gave me the gloves, but I lost them. And I about lost it. And then she said there was blood running down the wall and things like that. And it was, that was kind of emotional for a while, but she did pretty good. I thought she did really well, but I realized that homesickness is a sickness. First 5 years at Christmas time, she didn't want to go home, but she got physically sick at Christmas time every year. And while we were going to college, we had Mom and Dad over there sent care packages over here for Christmas. They were our whole Christmas while we were going to college. And we had 3 kids by the time we finished college. And one year there was a fire in New York and burned up all the packages, and we didn't have a Christmas. And that was quite a deal. We were scrambling around 7-Eleven trying to find something for.
So she goes from, she was making decent money. I mean, she was probably upper middle class, you would say, upper middle class Germany to
a dumb farmer.
Just about nothing in Idaho.
Yeah.
So quite the sacrifice for her.
It was. It really was. It was a big difference. There was a huge difference between us, and yet we just clicked. We just had a good time together, and we enjoyed being together, and she drugged me off to operas a couple times in Germany, and I thought, oh, this is terrible.
So how many times did you guys go back to Germany during that time?
I only went back about 3 times, I guess. But she went back every year while I was in college. It took us 6 years to get through college. I got educated. I don't know whether, I got graduated. Don't know if I got educated or not. But I made it. And I did a little bit of everything to get through college in that time. And we took care of 24 apartments, and she took care of collecting the rent, and I took care of maintenance. And I bought a backhoe and dug basements, and I sold sewing machines, built an armored car, and helped another man start an armored car service in Pocatello.
What was she studying? She already had.
We decided if I could make it, she'd stay home with the kids. And there was two factors in this. First, we had the little one that was going to be, if we didn't start our family, there'd be a big gap between. And secondly, she was trained in metrics, and she'd had to be retrained. And there was a man working there for the city or the state of Idaho, and offered her a job. And we talked about it, but then we found out she was expecting our first child, and so we said, no, as long as I can make it, okay. So that's why I say I graduated, but I don't know if I got educated or not, because I just was running from one thing to the next for 6 years, but we made it, and we had a good time together, and it was worked out well.
Wow. So you start this life in Idaho, and just slow progressing 6 years of college, and then have your own kids.
Yeah.
How did you guys start things up, or did anything kind of die between you and Germany, or?
No. Well, no. Basically, she was there with me the whole time, except when she went back. I joined the National Guard.
So she was going back once a year during that whole time, and just visiting family, or?
I was. I wanted to stay in touch with the Marine Corps, but the Marine Corps was 5 hours away in Idaho, and so I joined the National Guard. Well, the National Guard sent me to officer candidate school and intelligence school and armor school each summer. So when I had a break in college, that would help me get through school. And then I had the GI Bill and so that helped us get through school. But her parents were fairly well off, and they just sent her a ticket and asked her to come back to Germany. And so her and the kids went back to Germany while I went away to school. And that was interesting too, because she went back there, and then she said, the last time she went over, she said, Gary, next time you have to go with me. Every year I come back with one more kid and no husband. And so, but that got us through school. And then I taught seminary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 6 years, but they were not paying me very much money, and I was in debt from going to school. And
what did you go to school?
When did I go to school?
No, what was your degree?
Well, I thought I'd take the easy route and just teach German. So that's what German and sociology. I never did use either one of those, because the Army didn't care. And so...
So when you got out of college, did you go full-time back into the military, or?
No, I taught seminary for a little while, and then I moved up in rank and in responsibility in the National Guard on that time. And then I could see the writing on the wall, because I wasn't getting my bills paid off, and you hit the ceiling on the pay scale after 10 years if you don't get a master's degree, and I was not able to do that. And so the Army had this program where I could go active duty, so I just threw my hat in the ring and we went active duty. And we spent in Marine Corps, National Guard, and active duty, we spent 32 years. And so we went places, and every 3 years they moved us. And Irmgard liked that because she liked the big city. And she'd had enough of Pingree.
So where all were you stationed at? I mean,
mostly. I was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and Georgia, and Leavenworth. My last assignment in Leavenworth was training generals. So I went wherever the generals were, and that was very interesting for me. And and I was a lieutenant colonel in by that time, and so
Lieutenant colonel is pretty high rank. So I mean,
well, when I was a sergeant, I thought so. When I was a lieutenant colonel, I didn't think so.
So how did you progress to that? And
How did I what?
how did you progress to that?
Well, and in the Marine Corps, I was enlisted, and I just got out. But when I went into the Guard, then I was enlisted again. I was a tank driver, and I did tanks for a year or so. But then the opportunity come to become an officer, and so I kind of threw my hat in the ring to become an officer, and they signed me up to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, to officer candidate school, and so I went back there and became a lieutenant. And that was interesting too, because General Patton's son, General Patton, was our departing speaker, and he gave us some really good advice that we were going out there as lieutenants, and the world didn't belong to us, and that there were sergeants in there that had a lot of experience, and use them, tell them what they had to do, and get out of their way and let them do it. And I thought that was good advice, and so I came back, and I was trained as an infantry officer, and I came back and they assigned me to a tank unit, and we went to the field, and they were already at the field, and I told my Jeep driver, you're my driver, or told my sergeant, you're my Jeep driver, I'll tell you what I think, and you tell me if it's dumb or not. And we got through it all, and I happened to hit the right buttons, and I went from platoon leader to company commander, or troop commander, as in that case, to staff, and then they sent me on. I got to be a armored cav squadron commander, which was 900 men and 950 men, and 150 armored vehicles, and that I was responsible for. And then we went in the Army, and they assigned me to some general staff, and I didn't know what the dickens I was supposed to do as some general staff. I'd been in the field all the time, so it was a big learning curve, but I had some good commanders that had the opportunity to just kick me out and send me home, but they chose to teach me. And so the first time I was asked to write a letter for the general, and it took me 2 weeks to write it, and my commander would send it back to me and do it over and over and over and over again. One day he come back and sat down and told me exactly what he thought, and so by the time I was through, he'd write one and send it up to him, and he'd change happy to glad and send it on to the general, and so it worked out good. but I went from one general staff to the next one, and like I said, the last assignment was training generals, and so we would go wherever the generals were, whether it was Germany or Hawaii or North Carolina or wherever it was, and teach them what they needed to know to lead their division or their corps. And that was really kind of interesting, because we got to know what they were doing and what they should be doing. And well, it didn't take us very long to know who were the administrative weenies and who were the real warriors. and we, I had the privilege to train be with some pretty good people, and that were doing. I was just part of a team that were training them, and there were 65 of us, and so we did our thing here and there, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot.
I bet you learned a lot, but that's still a lot of advancement pretty quick. Did you guys see any action at all? I mean,
No.
what years did you serve from?
On the Marine Corps, it was from 59 or from 55 to 59, and then I was out. Yeah. And I went on my mission, and I came home, and from 61 on to I got out till I got out of the Army. The Army had a policy of age 53 or 28 commissioned years, whichever came first. And I hit the 53-year button, so I was out.
What year was that?
1990.
1990. So you saw Vietnam and Korea and all that.
Korea was just shutting down as I went in the Marine Corps. But while I was on the general staff, Lebanon or the Gulf War started. We had Grenada went down. I was in the War Plans Division at Fort McPherson. Fort McPherson is the backup headquarters for the Pentagon. So if the Pentagon goes down, Fort McPherson picks it up. We had a big office there, and I was the night ops officer for some of those, and we had annual programs that we tested with the Pentagon back and forth, and so then we were there just doing that kind of thing at that point. But I found that Vietnam was just going strong while I was going to college, and I had 1 semester left to graduate, and so we talked about it. I said, well, they're screaming for lieutenants and captains, and I've been training for this all this time. It's really my obligation to go. But we said, we're only a semester away from finishing school. Let's do that first, and then I'll go. And at that time, it wound down, so they didn't want me. And it was good that we did that because...
So you missed both Korea and Vietnam then?
Yeah,
Lucky.
I did. And that was good because the only requirement to stay in the Army after Vietnam was a degree. If I hadn't had a degree, they'd have kicked me out. So then I went to this War Plans Division, and Grenada went down, and that was infantry. And I was on a general staff anyway. And so I missed that one. And then right at the end was the Gulf War, and that was an armored one. But again, I was working on a general staff, and we were training generals, and so I wasn't even in the list to go. And then my age limit come up, and it was time to get out, and so.
So what were you doing exactly to train generals? I mean,
that was an very interesting deal. First of all, they came to Fort Leavenworth for 2 weeks with their staff, and they sat and they threw a whole bunch of academic stuff. What do you do for this and that and the other, and how to lead and how to write letters and how to get supplies and all that good stuff. But then you'd go to where they were. I went to Germany, and Germany had the mission. There were 3 divisions in Germany against 11 Russian divisions, and it was Cold War time then. And so those 3 divisions in Germany, their mission was to hold the Russians back long enough to get our armor from 3 corps clear across the water to push the Russians back. So their mission was just to fight a delaying action to try to keep the Russians back long enough to get more for combat power there. And so we went over and tested them, and they'd go, they would give us their top secret plan, how they intended to fight the war if the Russians decided to come across the border. So then the general would go to the field, he'd set up his tent, he'd put up his map, and he'd tell his troops, I want them here, all over the map, wherever he was going to fight the war, and then he'd start his exercise. Well, we had a combat group in Fort Leavenworth that were specialists in Russian tactics, and that's all they had learned. They were intelligence people, and that's what they'd learned. And so they would put into the computer their 11 divisions, and they'd put them in wherever they wanted to and any way they wanted to. And then they would satellite over to Europe, where we were, and our general never did see the computer, but the computer was quite a ways away, and he would move his troops here to there, and they'd move them real time from here to there in the computer. If there were a lot of Russians where he moved, he got killed. If he did his intelligence, flew an airplane over where he was going, put somebody in to take care of the bridges and did everything right, put his combat power in the right place, he came out pretty good, and he showed up at the right place and he was okay. But the guy over there, he was trying to anticipate what this guy over here was doing. So they would do whatever they thought the Russians would do to counter him. If they were successful, that general lost his shirt. But if he was really successful, and he used his intelligence and his combat, his artillery and his aircraft and everything properly, he came out all right. But there were a few generals.
So it was essentially it was war games training.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very much so, and that's why I say. And we soon found out who was the administrative weenie, that he'd come up through the ranks because he could put your pencil really good, and who was a real warrior, because there was a couple of times we had to stop our whole program and start over again because this general lost his whole division.
Well, that's not good.
No, that's not good. And it made me think, I'm glad I'm not in your battalion. And in fact, I used to think when I was a squadron commander of 950 men and 150 armored vehicles, and you scattered them out over long deserts, that was a lot of combat power. And then when I started training generals, I realized that the general would say, you take your little squadron and go around there and get killed, and I'm going to sneak around with a battalion or a regiment behind them. and I was just cannon fodder and didn't know it. So but then it just happened every time went along that even though I was trained for 32 years, well, they never asked me to go. So.
Wow. Well, you were there when the wall fell.
Yes.
So yes. What was that like being in and seeing that happen?
That was really very interesting because I went over there while it was still going, and we had these things going on in Germany and tanks moving here and there, and I'd go up and I could see the wall and see somebody over there, and I'd be looking at him over there and he's looking back at me. And so they were trying to anticipate what we were doing, and we were trying to anticipate what they were doing. So just in case they started.
So you were stationed there in Germany?
No, that's where I went to help the generals.
Oh, that's right.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
Yeah. The only time I went back to Germany was when they sent me back to just help out.
So where were you at when the wall fell?
I was actually, where was I? I don't really remember for sure. I just know that it was after, when did it fall? In 1990.
Yeah, right.
87 to 91.
That's what it says, like 87, 88, and 89 there.
Yeah, it was right, because the last time we were over there, the Russians were still across the border from us, and they hadn't collapsed yet. So, and I got out in 1990, so it was sometime before that. And
So you and Irmgard went back after the wall had fallen, right?
Yes.
After the wall had fallen.
Yeah. That was a really interesting little trip because I tried to do a little bit of research, and at that time we didn't have GPS, we had Garmin, and I had a little card that I could put in it that would tell me the roads in Europe. So I paid $150 for a card to stick in a little GPS, and we took it over there. They said, don't rent a Mercedes. You get in Poland, they'll strip it. So we said, okay. So when we got there, what'd they do? Give us a Mercedes. We asked for a Volkswagen. No, we haven't got any. So we got a Mercedes. And so we went back around and we put in this little GPS, especially in Poland. When we was going there, we put in their GPS and told we wanted to go to Kizelice, Poland, which was Freistadt, where she lived. And it took us to the back way through these little woods. And she says, if this car breaks down, we're going to be here the rest of our life. And they'll never find us. And so it took us back. But in Poland, they had motels, and they fenced them off. So we didn't lose our little car. But that was really very nice and fun because we went, and she went to try to tell some Polish person that she was there as a little girl, and their language is, most German language, you can see something that's similar, you can recognize it, and but in Poland, it doesn't even sound the same, And we thought everybody knows baby, and she was going like this, baby, and trying to talk to some lady, and she didn't know what the dickens we were talking about. We found some 4-year-old like this that was translating for us. We got by with English or German anywhere else but there, and Poland was kind of a challenge, but it was a lot of fun.
So were you able to find every spot that she had journeyed along? Or?
Well, the main areas that we thought that she could remember as a little girl, she really didn't know. She knew Danzig, and she knew Freistadt, where she lived, and where she'd gone ice skating, and that was an interesting one because as a little girl, she was run free. her mother gave her a lot of latitude, and in the winter, the ice, those little ponds in the city would freeze over, and she'd get her ice skates, and her girlfriends would go out there and skate on them, and they thought that was great stuff. She said she thought she was hot stuff when she was riding around with the skate. In fact, she had a girlfriend. Their family lived in an apartment, and above it was a dance floor with a parquet floor, and the girls got up and looked at that and thought, that'd be a nice skating ring. So up went the window and in went the hose. and when the water started soaking through the water downstairs into to those people, well, they were in deep trouble. She said, I was grounded for a long time after that.
Yeah. Then she later becomes a civil engineer and realizes that the weight capacity probably wasn't going to be there anyway.
Yeah. So but as a little girl, she had a lot of fun. She remembers her father coming before he left, taking a horse and buggy and pulling a sleigh behind it and pulling a lot of the kids behind it. And she remembers a lot about Christmas. There's a tradition in Germany that where you go to, when Christmas comes, they don't decorate their Christmas tree until Christmas Eve. And so Grandma would come and pick her up and take her to church, and Mom would decorate the tree. And so when they came back, there's the tree in all its glory, and everything was exciting, and that was a big thing to her. And she remembers walking through the snow to the church and going on Christmas Eve and then coming back. And another thing is Christmas is a Weihnachtsmann. He's on a sleigh and a horse, and sometimes he has the Christ child in a little bag on the cart, and he comes around each house and he gives them their gift, and they're supposed to say a poem. And she said one day one time when he came, she thought she was growing up. I'm not saying any poem, and she wouldn't say it. And he said, okay, sorry. And he took his little bag and went out and got on the sleigh. She said, fortunately, Grandma went back to the Weihnachtsmann and told him, she apologized. And he came back and she told him her little poem and got her present. And she says, good thing Mom had a little bit of compassion for me. But she remembered
especially
those
for
things.
The stubborn child, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Did you guys see any of the train stations or the tracks that she rode down or anything like that?
Well, it's all built up now, so it wasn't any big deal at that time. In Poland, though, Poland's a really poor country. There was still a lot of. You get out away from the big city, the tourists go to the big city and they get to show everything. But Poland was really bad, and she remembers. She's got a picture. In fact, we still have it in our house. She took a picture of a little farmhouse. It's just a little square house, probably not any bigger than your basement here. And it's got tar paper on the top, no shingles. And it's beat up, and they're very poor. You can see grass is about 2.5 feet tall. But sitting out in front is a nice table right in front of their door with a nice tablecloth on it and flower pots. And and she took a picture of that. Said they might have been poor, but they had some class. And so, but they were a lot of Polish people like that were very, very, very poor, and yet you could tell that under communism, it was not good. The city names were still, a lot of them were still in German, but a lot of them had German and Russian above them, and so it was really interesting in Poland to walk around. But the Polish people were so good. They're so nice. The little girl that was translating for us, she was just bubbling over it. She thought that was great sport. And and Irmgard tried to talk to some lady that was by her grandmother's house, and that's when she's trying to explain to her, we didn't get anything across to her at all. So.
Wow. That's quite a fascinating story. So at what point did her father come over?
Well, when he got cancer, he was hurting really badly, and when he was laying in bed there, he was in a home, and his his wife wanted to come and live with us so badly. She just, she loved us. She loved the country, and she wanted to come with us. And we wanted to bring her, but she said, you know, like I said, they didn't have a very good relationship when he came back, and she said one time, he's going to outlive me just to spite me. Well, he did. He passed away, or she passed away over there.
What year was that?
Let's see, 1987.
87.
Yeah, and
So
when I heard he was going, he looked like he was going to pass away, and I took emergency leave from Fort Knox and hopped on a military hop and went over to Germany, and I didn't tell him I was coming, and I showed up in the middle of the night, and their buildings are 13 feet, 3 stories high, and down at the bottom there's an electric door, and all the names are on it. You push that, and then it rings upstairs. If they want to let you in, they'll push the buzzer, and then it opens the bottom door. And I pushed the buzzer, and Irmgard pokes her head out the window, 3 stories up. Vesta, who's there? And I said, and I can hear her mom in the back, don't open the door, don't open the door. So I kind of surprised them, but I showed up, and they said that's it when they told him he was going to die right away. And I sat and visited with him, and that's when I told you he'd come and live 12 years. But he outlived her, and when we were in Fort Leavenworth or Fort McPherson, we moved him over with us, and he moved with us every 3 years, and every 3 years when I'd move into a new house, he'd chastise me if I got a house with stairs in it, and
he became the military part of the military family. Just move around with you guys then as you guys got your station.
Yeah. I just took him as a dependent. You know, it was kind of interesting when we got here. He lived with us here, and everywhere we went, he came over on a visa, you know. And every year where we went, he would his visa, when it elapsed, we just go down and tell him, and they'd give us a new visa. It lasts another 6 years, and we got down here in Salt Lake, and his visa lapsed, and was getting pretty old and pretty decrepit, and we went down there, and they said, no, we're not going to do this. I said, what do you mean, no? He said, yes, send him to Canada or down in Mexico, and then come back in, and he's good for 6 months. I said, well, he can't travel. He needs we can't help it. Sorry about that. So we harbored an illegal alien the last few years of his life. They didn't arrest us, so I
guess you were fine.
We might today.
So did you see a lot of German prejudice from your mission on, or a lot of people that were...
them against us?
No, us against them.
Oh, not really. Every Americans really like him. We got a neighbor, an Air Force guy that just came back from 17 years in Germany, and he loves Germany, and he speaks pretty good German too. And German.
So post-war,
yeah.
I mean, what you saw, what you experienced was still the Americans were pretty friendly with the Germans.
Yeah, they're still pretty good. And Irmgard they belonged to a German club here. There were seven ladies here that. Most of them, their husbands were dead. There was one had a husband. I was the only functioning husband. The other one had a counselor. He'd been sick for quite a while and had a stroke, and so I was really the only one that they could come, and I come and talk with them a little bit once in a while. And I've been keeping in touch with them a little bit, but they were all people who joined the Air Force usually. You know, married some Air Force guy, and the Germans in general have a really good attitude about it, especially out in the boondocks. You know, it was so nice out there with her, with Emil there, her ex-boyfriend. That was a lot of fun, you know.
So you didn't see a lot of Americans that were still bitter against the Germans or anything? Did you see anything like that in the military at all?
I haven't noticed any. I had a companion colonel in Fort McPherson, who was actually a German. He was in the American Army now, and he talked about being saved by the German Army. He and a little girl, when they were running from. Deep, he just said he didn't even know they were just hadn't retrograde and they were moving back, and he and his sister hid in a culvert. Were just hiding down in a culvert there, and some German guy there saw him, and he jumped off a moving truck and went over and grabbed him and put him in another moving truck the next time, put him up in the cab, put his helmet on him, and he said I rode along there, I was a soldier, I thought I was really proud. And he says, but that guy saved our lives that day, you know, and now he was a lieutenant colonel with me in the Army over here. So
well, to kind of wind this down a little bit, obviously we're God and country, so I want to bring God into it. So what was Irmgard's first impressions of God and her belief during the year of how God played into literally just saving her?
Yeah, she always felt like the Lord had something to do with things, but she had a big question mark when her husband died, you know, and she had a dream years before she was even married about standing and looking at a grave with a little boy on her hand. So after she got married and realized that's what it was, she realized that she'd been shown in advance that was going to happen. And she had a really good faith in God. Everything we did seemed like fell into place. We had such a good time together, and there were some bad times, some hard times, because going through college and getting her over homesickness and things like that. But she always had a great respect and testimony. And when I asked her to come over here, you know, and we only knew each other as missionaries and as a missionary, and we hadn't talked about it. We know, you know some when you have a chemistry and you like somebody, you know that, and we did, but we hadn't talked about it. And so when I asked her to come over here after dating four times, the last day we decided the only one that knew if she'd fit in over here was the Lord. And we fasted and prayed about it, and at the end of that, we decided whatever the answer was, we'd go with it. And I never got an answer to prayer before or since that was more powerful than that one. And apparently she did too, because she said yes. So, yeah, and so she's always had like we all do. We have questions, but we don't have doubts, and that was her. She had a lot of questions, like we all do, but she didn't have doubts.
As you lived your 50-some-odd years together, did she ever retroactively think back to how providential it was that express her feelings of how God guided that whole experience?
We did. We talked about that quite a bit, you know. We talked about especially that, like if she'd have stayed at Freistadt, we'd have never met. That was too remote. If she'd have stayed at Schegerot in Schleswig-Holstein, again, it was too remote. If her father had not lived, she'd have stayed in Schegerot her whole life. But because he left, he brought her into a big city where I happened to be. If I had gone on my mission when I was 19, she'd have been married. But I went in the Marine Corps first. And so her husband was killed, and when I met her, she was a divorcee, or a widow. And then I was working 10 kilometers away from where she lived. I wasn't even working in the area. And here we knocked on the door and talked to her mother, and her mother says, I'm not interested, but you can come and talk to my daughter. Well, no one in my mission had ever said that. If they didn't want any, they didn't want you to talk to their daughter either. Yeah. And so we come back, and then the fact that she had an in-law that kept stirring the pot that threw us together long enough for us to feel like we liked each other. And all of that to me and to her seemed to me like the Lord has more to do in our lives than we think He does.
Well, I don't believe in coincidences
I
at
don't
all.
either.
I think everything's pretty well planned out.
I think so too. Yeah, we everything seemed to fall into place for us. Even going to college, when we decided that she would stay home and I would work, things cropped up. These 24 apartments popped up just out of the blue. A lady said, I'm getting tired, and the owners were in California, and says, why don't you come take over this? We did, and they didn't even know we were doing it. And they gave us an apartment and gave me some, they came up to see us and said, what are you doing here? You know,
we work for you.
Yeah, and they gave us an apartment and paid us to help maintain them, and that was really a big thing to us, and you know, things that just cropped up that over and over again all through our career. I believe very strongly. I was bouncing around in the Army, and I was in 9 different bishoprics. Everywhere I went, seemed like some branch president or some bishop needed a counselor, and I happened to be it. And I remember when I was going to Georgia, they asked me to where I wanted to go, and they said they had an opening in Carson, Colorado. And I said, yeah, I want that. That's getting me out west where family is a little closer. And then I get my orders, and it's Fort McPherson, Georgia. And I said, don't you guys know the difference between Georgia and Denver or Colorado? What's going on there? And they said, we don't know. We just had a list there, and a general come in and put his finger on your name and said, send this guy to Georgia. And I went to Georgia, and the first counselor was being transferred to California, and they made me first counselor. So there are things happen like that over and over again that have convinced me that the Lord does have a lot to do with us in our lives and gives us opportunities, and whether we measure up or not depends on us.
I believe that too. So, I mean, being in the Army, you probably weren't in the home very often, and she was a stay-at-home mom, I assume, the whole time. Yeah. So how strong was God in her life in teaching your kids? Yeah, that, was really, really good. She was a stalwart in that area, and I was gone a lot. They'd transfer me, and I'd be gone, and she'd have to take over, and she just measured up and did the job, and sometimes some things are funny. She used to keep a 3-ring binder up over the refrigerator with a tab there for all the kids, and she'd write down things they'd say and do just for me and for her, and I just remember one thing that my firstborn, he was told not to jump on the couch. He was 4 years old, not to be jumping on the couch. She comes around the kitchen, and he sees just into the front room just to see him jump from the top down to the seat, down to the floor. And he'd been to primary, and he looks up at her and says, Jesus won't like me, will he? And before she can say anything, he says, oh, well, I don't care. I can't see him anyway. and so there was, we had some really good times, and she just measured right up. And I remember that our oldest boy going to primary, and somebody called him a Nazi, and come home, and my youngest boy, he wasn't in primary, he was too young. He says, let's go back and beat him up. And so they're really a lot of fun, and we had a good time, and we trusted in the Lord, and I can't complain. But I wonder if sometimes we laugh about it, because when she left, we sat around and talked when we knew she was going to leave. And I said, well, when you get up there in heaven, they're going to show you your mansion. So pick out the couch you want, because all you're going to be able to do is move it around. and then I've wondered about what your standing's going to be. I go up there, St. Peter, and say, what'd you do down there? Well, I spent 32 years learning how to kill people. And zip, down you go. So we'll see. But we had a good time, and the Lord had a big role in our lives and still does. Yeah. So she brought God into the home and prayer into the home and all that. Yeah. We tried to teach the kids the right thing, and we had they didn't all follow our path, and we all make mistakes, and so. What do your kids think of her experiences?
I think our kids have heard the story growing up so many times that it doesn't pass the so what test. So I wrote this book, and my kids and my grandkids and great grandkids, I think it means something to them more so than it does our own kids, because they've heard it. Yeah, for now anyway. And
well, if they've studied World War II at all, I mean, it's amazing because World War II. A lot of people died.
Yeah, they did.
Most people didn't survive. I mean,
it was a real blessing that they stayed alive and then we had a chance to get together. So it was good.
So she passed us 5 years ago, right?
Yes, she passed away in January in 1920.
2020.
2020.
Yeah, 2020. Yes, yeah.
Yep. And then her father.
Her father came over and lived with us, and he died in 1992 or 93, I guess, somewhere in that ballpark.
And is he buried here, or is he over back in Germany?
No, the Germans do not bury; they have to be cremated because of space, and that's what he wanted, and he was cremated here. And my parents are in Idaho, and they consented to just let us put it right there in the corner of their grave site. So.
Oh, there you go.
So, yeah. So, and I'm living on borrowed time and be 88 next month, and so you never know what's going to happen. But
the kid's still around, still close to you.
I got one in
here?
Sandy, one in Denver area, and one lives with me in the basement, and one of them died, 52.
Oh. So, grandkids? How many?
Oh, I think we've got 13. We got 11 grandkids and 13 or 14 great-grandkids and more to come. So, yeah. So, I'm pretty obsolete. I've been around a long time.
I can only imagine those big family pictures at this point.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing, and it was kind of fun.
Well, this was a great story. I think it's going to touch the hearts of a lot of people who are out there. I mean, how she got out and how her mother was able to get her out, and just the two of them and everything they passed through, and then how you guys were able to meet and come over here. I mean, it's a wonderful story as to not just normal perseverance and fortitude, but it's also a huge story as how God kind of plays into our lives and kind of directs things for the better.
Yeah, I'll say.
And so many of the stories that we learn from this period are more from the Jewish side and what they went through, and not the human side of what about the German children and what about the people there and what was it like for them.
Yeah, and I get a lot of people will kind of look at this, and because you'll get a lot of like I said, PTSD type stuff. I mean, soldiers come back what is it? It's survivor syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Where so many people died and you didn't.
Yeah.
Why did I make it? Why did I survive, right? And soldiers really get down upon themselves because they survived and so many other people didn't. I mean, she could have had the same thing happen. I mean, millions died in World War II, and she could have easily gone into that. What made me so special? Why did I survive and not these others?
Well, and I felt that way. What made me so special that I didn't go to war.
Yeah.
You know, it just happened.
And I can understand her father, too, because her father saw so much, and he's like, what makes us so special? Why did all this destruction happen? Why did so many people have to die? And who got to pick and choose who died and who didn't, right?
Yeah.
So, getting down and angry at God for what you see is very human. I mean, it's normal. And being able to get past that, and I hope he saw past that a little bit, because I mean, as you guys grew up, God-fearing people, and in all the positions you had in church services and stuff like that, I hope he picked up some of that and was able to bring God somewhat back into his life.
Yeah, I feel pretty blessed. Yeah, and give me a pretty strong testimony over the years.
Yeah. Like I said, I hope he picked up some of that. But we greatly appreciate you being on board. I am in awe over the stories.
Thank you.
I hope the audience appreciates as much as we do. And any last words?
Well, Irmgard and Gary both have had quite an effect in their community, and I tried to get you to see why you were preserved for this time, and I know the effect that he's had on our community. this may not ring bell for many people, but in our community, they often suspect that he's one of the three Nephites because he just goes around and spends his day looking for who he can help and serve in our community. And he's even been named and awarded, what was this award?
Hometown hero.
Hometown hero.
That's a
and
joke.
They play. He's just so humble. But those of us who know and love the Dixons, we know, and it's hard to describe the effect he's had on the community because of the experience he's had have made him who he is.
Now I'm just a nosy man with a dog walking around the community.
If you want to know who needs help in an area, we ask Gary. Gary knows.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate everyone being on board for this great episode. I really hope this touches your heart. Next week, we're going to have an historian on who is a Holocaust historian. He has personally interviewed hundreds of Holocaust survivors. He runs a Jewish museum in Chicago, and he's going to be on with us and telling us real live stories of Holocaust survivors and other parts of World War II, kind of go along with what we're doing today. So we hope you guys are on board next week, and we will talk to you guys then.
I can't see!